Hello everyone, welcome to Diagnostics by Rick. Today on 10 Minute Diagnostic, we're going to take a look at a 2006 Chevy Silverado. The testing will focus on basic electrical and wiring diagrams, but also on aftermarket add-ons. Let's get started. We have a 2006 Chevy Silverado with a 5.3 liter high output engine. The 8th digit of the VIN is a B. The tech says it will not crank over. Put a jumper wire from the B+ post on the battery to a wire at the ignition switch. Now it cranks and runs, but he wants to know what's wrong so it can be repaired properly. He tried a new ignition switch, but that didn't fix it. So who doesn't love a good plate of spaghetti? While it may be good on a plate, most of us hate spaghetti-like wiring mess under the dash of a vehicle. Look here and you will see the black wire that he had run from the battery. It's taped into the yellow wire from the ignition switch. Before I show a diagram, I just wanted to point out that clearly someone has been here before me. He put some nice little holes in the wiring at the ignition switch. The ignition switch diagram is divided up into two parts. Here we see one yellow wire. Here's the next diagram, but no yellow wires on this one. Let's zoom in a bit more on both of these diagrams. When looking for a no-crank condition, normally I would start with scan data. But in this case, we have a little bonus information because the tech working on it has found that by connecting the yellow wire to B+, the vehicle starts and runs with a key. So instead of starting with a scanner, in interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the ignition switch. Since we're diagnosing a no-crank issue, we should probably be most concerned with the switch in the start position. There are three circuits that get power when the key is turned to the start position. Two of these three circuits are also hot in the run position. So the one that probably matters is the other circuit, the only one that's hot in the start position and not in the run position. It just so happens that this is also our yellow wire that the tech had wired to the battery. First thing I want to do is remove his jumper. Now I want to verify battery power in and out of the switch in the start position. Power feed to the switch for this part of the circuit is at pin F, a red wire. But we also have another red wire here, so we have to make sure that we're checking the correct red wire. That's easy enough because the red wire we need is pin F, which is sandwiched between pins E and G, which are white and orange. So pins E, F, and G should be white, red, and then orange. With the T-pin back probing the correct red wire, my power probe shows 0 volts. Now I haven't looked yet, but I would think that this should be hot at all times since it's a feed to the ignition switch, but we never assume anything. So let's look at the diagram. Back to the diagram of the switch, it shows that it comes from diagram 1 of power distribution diagrams. We need to look here for reference point C. Here's diagram 1, and if you look near the bottom, you can see reference point C. This vehicle only has one battery, so voltage comes from the main battery, or the left battery here, and connects to the underhood fuse box. From there it goes through the ignition A fuse, and from there to reference point C, which leads us back to the ignition switch diagram. The lid to the fuse box shows us where ignition A fuse is. And of course it's blown. If you look, the ABS 40 amp fuse is also blown. Could it be that this was a problem before and someone swapped fuses? Maybe. Did I really just make you sit through a diagnostic for a blown fuse? Well, there is more to the story, but you'd be surprised at the number of blown fuses I diagnose. My fuse buddy for this style fuse is missing in action, so I had to improvise so I can check current draw on this circuit before putting a new fuse in it. I like to use a standard ATC or mini fuse for testing before I put a new fuse in when dealing with the other more expensive type fuses. So I get this all set up, and as soon as I turn the key on, the engine cranks and runs. I didn't turn it to the start position, I just turned the key on. Luckily, there was nothing in the way like test leads or body parts, so I quickly turned the key back off and went back to the diagram. Do you remember this yellow wire? The wire that the tech had run a jumper straight to the battery? I'd removed that wire before we began testing. But some of you may be saying to yourself, wait a minute, if he had B+ connected to this, why didn't the truck start as soon as the key was turned on before I replaced the fuse? After all, this is the crank circuit. This is the circuit that tells the PCM you want to engage the starter, and he had B+ running straight to it. If you remember from the earlier picture, the yellow wire had been cut and an aftermarket alarm GPS unit had been installed. Here we see the yellow wire and the aftermarket device hanging. I also noticed that the yellow wire has 5.7 volts on it at all times, even with the key off. So I removed the aftermarket device, temporarily twist the yellow wires back together, and then let's go try the current draw test again without having the engine crank over when the key's in the off position. So I had to make a little contraption here so I could stick a temporary fuse in it and measure current. This is only a 25 amp fuse, even though it is a 40 amp system. I don't want to even come close to heating up my test leads too much. And my normal test rig is missing somewhere, so I had to improvise. So now let's throw an amp clamp on here and see how much current we have. Alright, I'm hooked up on that fuse. Let's turn the key on. We hit about 9 amps there for a moment, settled in around 6. Let's go ahead and turn on min max. So we hit 10 amps. It's a 40 amp fuse. So whatever caused that fuse to blow is intermittent, maybe a wire rubbing somewhere. I could have done this on a scope and got a little more accurate, but the Fluke in min-max does update rather quickly, so it's probably fast enough to pick up if there were a large spike. So the circuit is only drawing about 10 amps. That is only about 25% of the fuse capacity and well within the normal operating range. So what can we do from here? Well, we can look over the wiring diagram and follow the harness to everywhere this circuit goes, wiggle, poke, prod, etc. We could assume that it was likely the aftermarket GPS alarm system that caused the fuse to blow. We could assume another tech blew the fuse trying to diagnose it, or maybe even the owner of the car. Or we could wait for it to become more frequent. This can be one of the more frustrating parts of being a mobile tech. Oftentimes, many people have had their hands on the vehicle before it gets to me, and I cannot possibly know what faults have been caused by them. With this vehicle, I gave the harness a quick inspection, especially around the metal brackets. I wiggled, gently tugged, but I was never able to get even the slightest increase in amperage across that circuit. Besides, I'd already spent enough time on this one, so I left it with them and told them where to look, and if they wanted to do more thorough harness inspection, they could do that. Likely, it was either caused by the aftermarket device or possibly another tech or the owner, but there's really no way I can prove that. Well, that wraps up another 10-minute diagnostic. If nothing else, I want you to take this lesson with you. Anytime you have an aftermarket alarm or a GPS on a vehicle that is also experiencing a no start, you should keep that device really high on your list of suspects. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit that thumbs up and subscribe button. If you want to help support this channel, I'll leave a link to my Patreon page in the description below. Every little bit helps me spend a little bit more time working on this channel. Thanks everyone. Have a good day.